You're listening to the Greek's Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
To the NFL's free agency tampering period, as players got moved, players got signed, players got extended. There is so much we need to get into and discuss before tampering period officially kicks off at 12 p.m. Eastern time today. So for those of you watching, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. What are your thoughts on everything we're discussing today? We'll be talking the DK Metcalf trade. We're going to be talking kind of the situation the Bengals now find themselves in because of a lot of the news that came out yesterday. We're also going to be talking ramifications of the Geno Smith trade and the Seahawks. We'll talk some Davante Adams as well. There's plenty to get into, but the first thing we will start with, we'll kick off and begin with, is going to be none other than the big news. DK Metcalf being traded from the Seahawks, heading on over to the Pittsburgh Steelers in one of the crazier trades, because I've got to say, the second round pick, number 52 from the Steelers, I did not expect to be high enough to go and land this wide receiver here, but sure enough, it did. So the Seahawks trading DK Metcalf for pick number 52 in the draft. And on top of that, the Steelers went ahead and added 4 years to his current deal. This final deal includes the $18 million in last year of his contract that he had with Seattle for a grand total of 5 years, $150 million. This makes DK Metcalf the number 3 in overall contract value as well as average annual value. On top of that, DK Metcalf getting paid, getting his opportunity to go to a new place, start anew, and also make the money at $33 million a year that he was expecting to earn for himself. And I've got to say, this is one of those things that breathes some serious life into an offense in Pittsburgh that just did not quite seem to have a direction that it needed to go in. There is still uncertainty, though, but with DK Metcalf in the fold, you know exactly what this team is trying to do now, and that's very clear. They are trying to open up this offense. They want to be explosive. They want to be able to go shot for shot with other teams in the AFC North, like the Baltimore Ravens or the Cincinnati Bengals, both teams able to essentially score at will, and then some of the other top AFC teams that are in the NFL as well. You look at a team like the Buffalo Bills, of course, a lot of really good teams with a lot of offensive firepower in the AFC, and Pittsburgh is looking to not only have a great defense, but also be able to back up that defense with an offense that has just kind of fallen short the last few years here. But the big question, of course, now, where do they turn at the quarterback spot? They were obviously in the hunt last year for a wide receiver with Brandon Ayuk. They've now secured that opportunity with DK Metcalf now here. But the question, Justin Fields, maybe an Aaron Rodgers who's been linked to Pittsburgh as well, or with reports coming out yesterday, and this was prior to this DK Metcalf trade even happening here. If we look at this tweet here from Diana Rossini, the Steelers are expected to make an offer to pending free agent Sam Darnold per source. Many around the league believe Darnold will wind up in Seattle, but Pittsburgh is doing its due diligence on any potential options ahead of the new league year. So this, and again, I need to stress this. This came out before the DK Metcalf trade news. So this was kind of, it's funny because it feels like the Steelers kind of went and stole the allure that the Seattle Seahawks had for Sam Darnold to come out to Washington to play with them. You look at the Seahawks prior to this trade, you have DK Metcalf. You also have yourself Jackson Smith and Jigba. You have yourself a really fun offensive coordinator who took this Seahawks offense fairly far despite some offensive line issues last year. Running back issues and injuries in that room also kind of hampering the production you could have had on the ground as well. But they go ahead, they snatch DK Metcalf from them, and now you can dangle not only the opportunity to come play with a winning defense on one side of the football, but now your offensive side. Yes, the offensive line does have a couple of question marks, I would say, but not anything that I'm too worried about. And then the wide receiver room, of course, now fielding George Pickens and DK Metcalf at the top of that list here. Definitely not too shabby if you ask me. Calvin Austin really coming on strong last year as well. And then the running back room is kind of the situation that you really have to look at here with, I believe Jaylen Warren is the one running back you have, or not the one, but the lead back that you have with Najee Harris potentially hitting free agency. if Najee Harris ends up returning, you're looking at a guy who's had 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons to back up Sam Darnold, coupled with those 2 wide receivers, a tight end that you can count on in Pat Freiermuth as well. This has turned the Steelers into quite the attractive situation for any quarterback that's in free agency. But the big question mark now is just who. Are they bringing back, like I said, the Justin Fields? Are they bringing back and going for the veteran in Aaron Rodgers? Are they going to go and get the guy who potentially resurrected his career last year and bank on him being the Sam Darnold we saw in the first 16 games the Vikings played and not the final 2 games that the Vikings played? There are so many questions left to be answered, but Pittsburgh has positioned themselves to be a massive player in free agency. And in my eyes, listen, there is obviously the possibility that Justin Fields sticks around, and it sounds like based off reporting, there is a good chance he does, but there are other teams that are also interested in him. And if I had to imagine, and while it was Russell Wilson's job in Pittsburgh, and I get this, Justin Fields, the person, does have to feel slighted in some sort of way when Russell Wilson got healthy, that he got pulled from being the starter and had to sit back on the bench as Russell Wilson made his return from the calf injury that he had been dealing with the first 6 weeks of the season, while the team was 4-2 and well in the thick of things. I would assume that Justin Fields, if he's as competitive as he is as a competitor in the NFL, that there is a piece of him that probably is not happy about that, and in my eyes could lead to him eventually choosing to go somewhere else to make a bit of a point here. Then there's that conversation of Aaron Rodgers to Pittsburgh, which has basically been happening since Aaron Rodgers left Green Bay. Prior to him landing in New York, they were also linked to each other a couple years ago. That is one that I'm curious what you Steelers fans have to say about that one, because the idea of Aaron Rodgers is fun, but at this point, the question is now, is this more name value than anything else? Like, does Aaron Rodgers really still have it in the tank to be able to take a football team and lead them to a Super Bowl championship? Because it feels like that's kind of where the Pittsburgh Steelers are. And in my eyes, because it seems like Russell Wilson is the one that's kind of out of the conversation right now. I guess he is still a possibility to return, but that's the guy that I feel like I've seen the least discussed in regards to like a return to Pittsburgh. Aaron Rodgers is the one guy out of these other options that's made it to the dance and won a ring. And yes, that was a very long time ago, but aside from Russell Wilson, the other guy is Aaron Rodgers. And there is that massive question mark with Sam Darnold right now. Can he overcome the situation, the pressure when the lights are on the brightest, like we saw with the Vikings those last couple of games of the season? It just did not look good. The offensive line play also wasn't necessarily great, but it felt like he kind of cracked a bit under pressure, and he was hanging onto the ball way too long. You can't pin everything that happened to Minnesota at the end there just on the offensive line. But the way I see it, Pittsburgh is going to be aggressive, and whether it winds up being Justin Fields staying in Pittsburgh, maybe they go after and snatch Sam Darnold, or they opt to go with the veteran leadership in Aaron Rodgers. This is a team that, if they have a good quarterback and they get good quarterback play out of said good quarterback, they're contending in the AFC. Absolutely. You can't have this team built the way it is right now, where you basically just need to settle on a running back that's going to be your number one guy and find the quarterback you need, and you're good to go. That defense is as good as any in the NFL as of this moment right now, and I'm assuming they maybe add a piece to it this offseason. If there's one thing that you can count on in Pittsburgh, it's them making sure that defense is as sharp and as good as it can be every year. So you pair some good quarterback play with what they've got over there right now, and Pittsburgh just feels really, really good in my eyes, and I'm looking forward to seeing what this team turns out to be. The next bit of news that or not really news, but just kind of more of an opinion piece in my eyes that I feel like is worth discussing here, because the Bengals, man, I have a bit of an issue with what's going on there, and it doesn't seem like I'm alone in this, because I took some time before I got into this, decided to get into this conversation to kind of feel out what some Bengals fans are thinking right now. And there was a bit of news that happened yesterday that kind of puts Duke Tobin's foot in his mouth a bit, and it's only going to hurt the Bengals as they continue to kind of sit on their hands and watch some massive deals get made here. I want to take a step back and bring you all back to the combine a few weeks ago so we can listen in onto what Duke Tobin had to say about paying Ja'Marr Chase. So let's have a listen here.
Going to be our priority. He's a fantastic football player. He's going to end up being the number one paid non-quarterback in the league. We're there. Let's get it done. The earlier we can do some of this stuff, the freer it gives us to build the rest of the team. We have other needs that we want to build. And so we want to get these kind of things done early enough to where we can really focus on building out the rest of the football team. But they're all priorities to us. But the ones that aren't signed are the ones that are on the table first.
So Duke Tobin basically saying that Ja'Marr Chase is a priority. They want to make him the highest non-paid quarterback, in the NFL. Well, since that statement was made just a few weeks ago, that number has only gone up, and it's gone up a few times now. You look at as recently as DK Metcalf's trade and sign last night, $33 million a year, which is good for third most in AAV as far as wide receivers are concerned right now. Justin Jefferson leading the way at, I believe, $35 million. And then, of course, we have this piece of news that came out yesterday, which compounded news that came out about Max Crosby signing extension a few days prior. But from Adam Schefter here, from trade to truce and beyond, the Browns and Myles Garrett reaching an agreement today on a record contract extension that averages $40 million. Yes, $40 million per year, and includes $123.5 million in guaranteed money, and now makes him the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Let's just highlight that again. Highest paid non-QB in NFL history, sources tell ESPN. That is a bit of a problem if you ask me, because that means that if they're still planning on making Ja'Marr Chase the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL, you've got to push past $40 million a year now. They had the opportunity to set up Ja'Marr Chase last offseason with something along the lines of like $35 million and $1 just for him to beat Justin Jefferson's contract that he was working with last year and still is at this current moment. But now you're in the situation of, well, you got to pay him $40+ million a year. Essentially, the Bengals are kind of losing this offseason, and they're not even really doing anything. And there's some other issues that I have with the way they've kind of been handling things, and I don't really understand it. Now, I get wanting to have Joe Burrow happy, but he's on a contract right now that's averaging $55 million a year at this current moment here. You are now setting yourself up to have to pay Ja'Marr Chase $40 and some change million a year, coupled with the fact that T. Higgins right now is currently stuck on a franchise tag that is averaging, $26 million on the year. That is just an AAV for 1 year alone of $121 million tied to just 3 players for this season here. Now, that's not the actual number for the cap number, but just to kind of lay out what we're potentially staring down should we see long-term extensions for Chase and T. Higgins come in during the next maybe few weeks or so of this offseason. Like, those are the numbers that this team is potentially going to be working with down the road in a year or two. And that is a ludicrously large amount of number for just 3 players on a roster that fields up to 46 players on game day and a total of 53 guys at any given moment during the season. And the other thing, you now have this situation with Trey Hendrickson as well, and this has been going on now for a few days. They have allowed him to seek a trade partner. They basically told him if you can find high-value compensation for your services, they'll be willing to deal him. The Bengals feel like they are overly investing in the offense at the expense of a defense that I don't really know who they're going to be able to field, as they just throw every single dollar and then some at the offensive side of the football. Their goal was to pay Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson this offseason, but the numbers have just continued to climb with what happened with Max Crosby just a few days ago, and now Myles Garrett here. It's only going to make this more and more difficult each and every day that goes by, and I genuinely can't believe that this hasn't been resolved yet. If Duke Tobin's saying what he's saying at the NFL Combine weeks ago, and he even says we're there, How did you not already get Jamar Chase locked up on that 35 or maybe let's say $36 million, whatever it may be? It's not like anyone was going to, besides Jamar Chase, was going to get paid more money than what Justin Jefferson is currently making at this moment in time. He is, in a lot of people's eyes, the best wide receiver in the NFL. The next argument would be Jamar Chase. So those are the two top dudes. Those are the two top guys that were going to be making the most money. It's not like the Bengals were foreseeing the Browns paying Myles Garrett $40 million a year. We got a written statement from Myles Garrett saying he wanted out a few weeks back at the end after the season wrapped up. So it's like, the mismanagement is really killing me. And I've got to stress, I'm not like a Bengals hater. I don't hate Cincinnati. I don't want to see Cincinnati fail. I actually like Cincinnati. I'm a fan of Joe Burrows. I love his game. I love the setup they have with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And it's this really fun kind of situation of just like offense. But listen, as I've got something in my eye here, my biggest concern right now is that they're trying to pay all these guys money, and there's going to be nothing left for the defense. You can't pay Trey Hendrickson anymore. And at this point in time, how are you going to field a football team that's going to actively be competitive in the best years of Joe Burrow's career right now at his current age? Like, this is the time to compete, and he's in his prime. I really wish that Cincinnati would figure this out and hurry up and get these guys paid and just get the big key pieces to their franchise situated, because I'm genuinely worried that this is a team that is going to go into the 2025 NFL season and they're going to have to score no less than 40 points a game if they want to win. They're set to let some guys go on defense. They're losing guys on defense, and how are you going to make this work if all of your money is tied up to a quarterback and two wide receivers, or almost half, like $121 million in AAV for 3 contracts? That's like, what is that? It's a little bit more than a third, but a little less than half of the actual money that you are allowed to pay players under the cap. And I understand, the cap is kind of crap, but it doesn't make sense to me, because there's clearly an unwillingness to pay everybody from Cincinnati's end, with now Trey Hendrickson being allowed to figure out if there's anywhere else he can end up going. There doesn't really feel like there's any light at the end of the tunnel, and I don't want that for Cincinnati. I genuinely do not want that. So we'll see where they go here, but I'm a little bit concerned about the direction things are heading. Now we'll go ahead, we'll take a look at some other news that came out this week. The Seattle Seahawks. This is not the first time they had some stuff going on this weekend with the DK Metcalf trade. Yes, it feels like ages ago, but they also did trade away quarterback Geno Smith, and that is something we definitely need to get into here. It was a blockbuster weekend altogether, but of course it kicked off with that Geno Smith trade. We'll go ahead, we'll take a look at this one here from Tom Pelissero's tweet. The Seahawks are trading two-time Pro Bowl Geno Smith to the Raiders for a 2025 third-round pick. Sources tell the insiders. It's a reunion for Pete Carroll and Smith, who also is expected to get a new contract, and Seattle will need a new quarterback on top of that. Now, I had this piece together, I would like to say probably somewhere along the lines of like the day after it happened, with how I was going to discuss this. But then, since then, we also got ourselves the DK Metcalf news. The Seahawks also allowed Tyler Lockett to walk prior to this as well. So the conversation around all of this kind of changes drastically. Now, in hindsight, it makes a little more sense than I think it initially seemed when it first happened here. Geno Smith having a literal career renaissance under Pete Carroll when he took over at quarterback in 2022 being the best season that he's put together. Offense was never really perfect, though, because that offensive line over the last 3 years has been pretty bad. And I mean, Geno Smith ranked second in sacks from 2022 to now with 127, seconds to only, interestingly enough, quarterback Russell Wilson at 133. But it hasn't been perfect in Seattle, whether it was during the Pete Carroll era or even after. And when you look around and see what some of the people are saying, especially the people that like consider themselves like tape gurus, a lot of people point to the fact that Geno Smith played fairly well last year, all things considered, with the way the offensive line play was working it out. I'll let you all decide if that's the case or not, but I do think that there is something to be said about 127 sacks allowed in 3 years. So in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense why this move ended up happening here. The Raiders obviously being heavily rumored to bring in a number of different quarterbacks. They were in on Matthew Stafford. Sam Darnold was another one that was being talked about as well. And then, of course, there was the potential plans of them going after somebody like a potential Cam Ward or Shador Sanders or someone in the draft, depending on how things shake out at number 6. Whether they need a quarterback not or now, up for discussion, but we'll get into that in a second. But the big thing I want to focus on now is it feels like the Seahawks are kind of hitting the reset button, interestingly enough, at least on the offensive side of things, despite the fact that they went 10-7. And I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that it was like I don't think you could really call a 10-7 season perfect, but it was definitely a 10-7 season that felt closer to like around 500 to maybe even a little bit less when you look at some of the things that happened there with, blowout losses to playoff teams like the Lions, the Bills, the Packers, again, all playoff teams there. Then you had like that 6-3 Thursday Night Football win over the Bears, but you also had games that ended up being tight against good playoff teams, like a 27-24 loss to the Vikings, but then you have like a 29-20 home loss to the Giants that's mixed in there. And yeah, you can point to injuries. The defense was hurt early on during the season, so there's a lot that you can that like went into the ultimate 10-7 season that they had. But it's interesting that to have gone 10-7, knowing that if the offensive line was maybe a little bit better, you'd be in a situation where, this team could probably improve upon that. But now we're seeing a big reset button hit. 2 starting wide receivers are gone from the team. You also let the quarterback that you've had for the last few years, who apparently wanted out, because the reports are the Seahawks did offer Geno Smith $40 to $45 million a year, and Geno Smith said no, which leads you to further wonder, were there just internal problems with Geno Smith? Did he just simply want out, and that's why this is happening? And having known that, they just decided, all right, if we're going to make the change at quarterback, maybe we make some changes in other places too, letting Tyler Lockett walk, trading DK Metcalf away, and just kind of retooling the offense around the fact that you still have I would say, argue, a rising superstar in Jackson Smith and Jigba. So now the question is just, what do the Seahawks do at quarterback? And the reports initially were that, all right, Seattle done with Geno Smith, are now heavily favored to be going after Sam Darnold, as a few other teams have been. But they're all in now because they still have a really competitive roster to work with here. They were just 10-7, just outside the playoffs looking in. But then this trade with DK Metcalf happens, and now they find themselves competing with the team that they just traded a wide receiver for the services of the quarterback that they apparently put into their crosshairs. Now, you had the bargaining chip of JSN and DK. Now you don't have DK, you just have JSN. And so you put yourself in a very weird situation of, come to Seattle. We have a pretty good young defensive-minded head coach and a pretty good young defense that, probably should be a little bit better than it has been. But again, injuries, I guess we could cut some slack there. But you lost some of the allure getting rid of DK into a team that is now in on Sam Darnold as well. It's just interesting how that trade worked itself out. And now there's, the conversation of, all right, well, does Seattle look to bring in a guy like Aaron Rodgers? Is that the guy that they're going to be looking for here? Is that the type of guy that you want to bring into Seattle at the current stage that they're in, where Aaron Rodgers at this point here, he wants to, I would assume, compete for a Super Bowl at this stage in his career, unless he's just interested in riding it out and making some cash before he's actually all washed up and done. And whether he is or not, I believe, is a conversation of debate right now. But then you're also competing with, a team like the Giants, who apparently are interested and have mutual interest from Aaron Rodgers as well. And then there's like the dark horse conversation of, could the Vikings potentially be in on Aaron Rodgers? And I know there's a lot of people that want to see that full circle moment happen with Brett Favre having finally made. It's funny because the parallels of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers and how their careers have gone is wildly crazy when you consider Green Bay to New York to Minnesota, And Aaron Rodgers is 2/3 of the way there. He's just got to make that final stop in Minnesota for a couple seasons. But, I mean, there's a lot to be had there. And what Minnesota decides to do with Daniel Jones, whether they re-sign him or not, or if the Colts are able to rip Daniel Jones, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but like if the Colts could rip Daniel Jones away from the Minnesota Vikings during free agency, there's so much up in the air right now. And it's not even like you have the opportunity to maybe try to dangle like Davante Adams in front of Aaron Rodgers anymore and be like, hey, well, come bring your buddy too to come play with us. He wants to play on the West Coast side, because Davante Adams has already signed with a new team. So you find yourself in quite an interesting situation with the Seattle Seahawks, and you're far enough back in the draft that I think getting one of the top 2 quarterbacks is out of the question. But, I mean, it's not completely impossible that maybe they do make a move for a quarterback in the draft. Maybe they sign a veteran guy and they I don't know. I don't want to say this is a wash season, but the quarterback market is not great right now in free agency, all things considered. And even the quarterbacks that are in the draft, like, people aren't even sure about number 1 and number 2, never mind 3, 4, and 5, and who you could potentially get in like rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, as opposed to round 1 quarterback. So the Seahawks just find themselves in this interesting situation that I did not anticipate them being, and I don't think a lot of people anticipated even like a week ago from today. So this is definitely one of those teams you got to keep your eye on, because you don't really know what Seattle's up to right now. And I'm really interested because, again, this was a team that was just outside the playoffs, and injuries really caught on that defense for a decent bit of amount of time of the season. And if that doesn't happen, there's a chance that they could have finished the year 11-6 and in the playoffs instead of the outside looking in. But we'll just have to see what Seattle does. But this is an interesting situation developing in Seattle, and it has been a wild weekend, I'm sure, to be a Seahawks fan. And then finally, last but certainly not least, this is more of just me kind of talking about something that I'm excited to see play out here, because this was not it. And again, another one of those hindsight is 2020 things, but not a move that I really saw coming, but I am happy to have seen happen because it ends up making the Rams far more exciting. And that's, of course, Davante Adams signing with Los Angeles, as this tweet says from Ian Rappaport here. Davante Adams to the Rams. He gets a 2-year deal worth $46 million with $26 million guaranteed. He wanted to stay on the West Coast, and he is now going to be on the West Coast for at least the next couple of seasons of his career. And listen, like I said, in hindsight, this move actually makes a ton of sense. And a lot of it comes down to just the current situation that they have with Cooper Kupp. It's very clear that he is a bit upset with how this is ending in Los Angeles. I feel like he wanted to retire a Ram. And to be fair, I understand that, especially with the success he's had in LA. But this happens a lot. It is a business, and it is what it is. And he's even understanding of that. But Puka Nacua has kind of taken over that. The guy that Matthew Stafford can like relentlessly feed the football to, and he can push the ball 10-15 times in a game to that one singular guy, and it feels like Puka Nacua has evolved into that guy. I mean, you look at his numbers over the last 2 years, and he's missed 6 games in that same span. 184 receptions, nearly 2,500 yards, and 9 receiving touchdowns. I mean, Puka Nacua has been feasting in his first couple of seasons here in the NFL, and I would assume that things are going to continue to just rise up with their connection as they get more and more comfortable together going into year 3 and beyond. But now you bring in Davante Adams, who I would consider one of the best route runners in the NFL, all things considered. Whether he still remains one of those top elite guys, I think is a little bit up for debate, but he did show that he still has some juice in the tank, especially once he got traded out of Las Vegas and went to New York. And if you want to say that Aaron Rodgers was feeding him the football, so be it. That's fair, but also he was still getting fed the football and making plays. So I get that argument there that some people are trying to make, but it's one thing if you're just being fed the football. It's another if you're being fed the football and still making plays. He finished, and this is just his Jets number, not the season entirely, 67 catches, 854 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaging nearly 12.5 yards per reception. That's just while he was on the Jets with Rodgers. He's definitely still got some play in the tank in my eyes here, and he's somebody that defenses have to respect at minimum still. It's not like there's no defense out there right now that's sitting there going, Davante Adams is washed, we don't need to account for him. Like, the reality is that there might be people saying that on the internet, but that's not what defensive coordinators are saying when they're in meetings game planning for this guy. Still, he can still get it done, and now you have to deal with him and Puka Nacua on the other side, and a quarterback in Matthew Stafford who's still playing at one of the highest levels in the NFL right now. It's no surprise. The allure of playing with Matthew Stafford, a guy who just won a Super Bowl a few years ago, playing underneath an offensive mastermind in Sean McVay. Not to forget that the Rams also have a strong running game with Kyren Williams out of the backfield as well, coupled with a really impressive young defense that, in my eyes, is a few steps ahead of where they probably were expected to be coming out of this past season and should only continue to get better as they go down the road and add more pieces this offseason. It all really makes sense. And the biggest key to them all, and when we were talking Cooper Kupp earlier, this is a big piece of it. The key here in this signing to Davante Adams for LA really comes down to just availability. You look at Davante Adams, he missed 3 games last season with a quote-unquote, and for those of you that are not watching, air quotes there with the hands, a hamstring issue that miraculously healed and was all better literally the week he got traded. Interestingly enough, prior to that, he hadn't missed a game since 2021 where he missed one singular game. And I wonder why he missed that one game. If you go back to 2021, where the Packers were at that moment in time, you will get your answer to that. Meanwhile, you look at Cooper Kupp, and it's been a tough last 3 seasons altogether, basically missing an average of 6 games a season since he had that monster 2,000-yard season during the Super Bowl run, or near 2,000-yard season with, 16 receiving touchdowns on top of that. That was when they had him paired with Odell Beckham. 18 games missed altogether, at least 6 basically every single season. It's been a tough road, and it just the question of health and his body holding up, I think, is a very fair conversation to have, and is a very fair thing when you consider the money that he was being paid and why the Rams were more than willing to move on from Cooper Kupp and essentially bring in Davante Adams, who, around the same age, it's not like Davante Adams is a spring chicken, but a guy who, again, still competing at a high level, can still produce when he's given the opportunity to, and he has a far better bill of health, so you probably feel a lot better than that, or better about that, as the Rams, as Sean McVay, as the GM over there. You're looking at this going, all right, well, it's like a 1-for-1 type of move. And it's almost like a lateral move, if you want to kind of call it. Maybe even a slight plus to Davante Adams, just because of the fact that he's been so much healthier over the last 3 years in comparison to what we've seen from Cooper Kupp. But I really like this here because the Rams they're in a good position right now, and they're in a position to be aggressive because they're so far ahead of schedule, especially on the defensive side. Like, I cannot stress that enough. What that defense did with how young they are last season was extremely impressive, and you can only expect for them to improve. But it makes a lot of sense. They're competing right now. They made it into the playoffs. They won a playoff game. Like, this is a team that nobody anticipated being in the position that they're in. So for them to be aggressive, go and make this type of move, Matthew Stafford throwing to Davante Adams and Puka Nacua, man, that's lightning in a bottle, if you ask me. And now you just have to wonder where Cooper Kupp ends up going. There are plenty of wide receiver needy teams. The wide receiver free agent market is not necessarily strong. The top of the draft is not necessarily the most impressive in the world. There's like 1 or 2 guys you may really like, and then it's a meat and potatoes draft is what a lot of the draft analysts are saying. So for Cooper Kupp's sake, not a bad season to be getting let go by a team and having a track record, at least production-wise, that you can kind of, tout to people that you're going to see. But the injury history will ultimately kind of determine just how much he makes out with in this trade deal. But I would anticipate that at some point Cooper Kupp's going to be allowed to walk or even be traded within the next couple of days. That's my assumption there, is before the actual free agency opens, I think Cooper Kupp will be allowed to either just test the waters in free agency via release, or they finally get a deal done and they get him moved in there. Maybe Los Angeles is more willing to take lesser compensation now that they have went and found themselves an actual replacement for him, and they have him already on the team now. It makes you a little bit more willing to let go of a guy for maybe a little bit less than what you were kind of hanging on to before. So we'll see where they all end up there. But that's pretty much everything I got for you all today. Again, it's a wild time in the NFL right now. There's plenty going on. And I mean, again, tampering period starts today at 12 p.m. Eastern time. It starts today is air quotes on that one too, because we all know that that's been going on already. But starts today. As soon as 12 o'clock hits, I won't be too surprised if at 12:01 or 12:02, we're already seeing deals agreed upon, which is lightning fast work for contracts to be drawn up and handed over and reviewed and looked at that quickly by people. I've got to say, people can apparently, in the NFL's world, at least as far as agents are concerned, can read a lot faster than I can. It's very impressive that they can go through contracts in a little under 60 seconds the way they do. Very impressive stuff. But let me know your thoughts, your opinions in the comment section down below. We'll probably meet again potentially on like Wednesday or something like that. Just there's going to be so much going on. I might even do like a Thursday show and then a Friday or Saturday show because there's going to be so much to go over. So keep your eyes peeled. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed. But as always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.